inner lives of men. This is a must read. This tells you, she actually did a survey, secular. So it wasn't, just based on Christian people, even though there are Christian people in here. She did a secular survey. And I'm telling you what, this lady is dead on about what men are. I mean, the men read this book and are like, how did you find this out about us? So this is a must read. And then this is the one Les told you about for men only that her and her husband wrote. And for any of you who have kids, she has one out for young women only now to prepare them for their road that they will walk in relationships with men in their life. So excellent, excellent books. Another one we have for you guys is, I don't know how many of you were here the weekend that Jake spoke, Rediscovering Romance. And Jake is our youth pastor. He hit a home run on that message that weekend. People were blown out of the park by this kid that we've watched actually grow and get married and have a baby, and he's just an amazing guy. So we have them over here on the corner. And if you would like to take and listen to this message, Jake is probably, 23 now maybe? 22, 23. So it's just an incredible message on romance.
And those are just for you to pick them up and take.
Take them with you. Our culture often depicts men as a bunch of clods who have no desire to be romantic. Most men feel they are secret romantics who, like most of us, do not experience nearly as much intimacy in their primary love relationship as they would like. Even more desiring, men desire romance apart from sexual intimacy. The great news is that men long for connection, togetherness, fun, and intimate time with us. It's just not always about sex. The vast majority of men actively enjoy and desire romance. So women ask, well, if they want to do romantic things, why don't they? Well, it's because they feel unsure of themselves and they are not confident you will like their efforts. There tended to be three distinct concerns that caused them to hesitate. The first one was they wouldn't do a very good job. Second one was they were haunted by past romantic failures. And third one is it was difficult to change gears. Almost every man needs to decompress before he can think about being a romantic, loving husband. And I know for Les, when he comes home from work at night, I learned this lesson the hard way. When he came home, it was like, okay, I haven't seen him all day. I want to unload on him. And if I'd had a bad day with kids, whatever. I learned that if I gave him 20 minutes in his easy chair to take a nap, I had a whole different guy for the rest of the night. He just needed that 20 minutes to just take everything away from the day and to just calm down. So we ask, what does romance really mean? Well, the dictionary defines romance as being romantic. And the definition of romantic in the dictionary, the act of romance. So, it's just like going in a circle. So no wonder people get confused about romance is. Romance is not something that happens once a year. And in fact, Valentine's Day is one of the hardest days of the year to be truly romantic, because romantic gestures are expected. So it's like even, I'm sure there's many stories about what hasn't been done on Valentine's Day because it was expected to be done. So you can't carry that same thing into the other areas where you need to be exploring romance. There's 3 elements of real romance in a marriage. Self-initiated pursuit, be a self-starter. Creative communication of value. Say to your husband that you are important to me. They love that. Speak love in the language of your spouse. And you guys have already learned that, your love languages. That's a big one. Learn to speak their love language. Romance is vitally important to a strong, healthy marriage. Keeps your relationship growing and your passion alive. It's a discipline, it's a priority, it's a way of life. And it will keep your relationship from deteriorating. And believe me, when we go back and think about when we had kids, we had to be intentional about planning romance. Whether it was after the kids were in bed, we had a steak, shrimp dinner with candles on the table. We had date night once a week. At least every 3 months, we would leave our kids with someone and go spend the night in a hotel somewhere, even if it was in town. You have to do it, because what will happen is when you get to be our age and your kids are all gone from home and you look at each other and you go, who are you? Your whole life and your whole energy were invested in raising your family, all the things that come with family. Your spouse has to be number one priority under God in your life. Nothing else is in their place. One of the things that the people around the office here hate about my husband is he sends me 14 days worth of Valentine's cards. And he's been doing this for years. So on February 1st, I get my first card. And some days I may get 2 cards. One may be funny, one may be definitely more serious. But I'll find him in my purse. And I usually wait to bring him into the office because they're all just like waiting to see what kind of card I got. So
the women think it's great. The guys in the
just
office hate it because they're like, man,
you're making us look bad. So, and I always keep one of them. There's one right by my light switch. And every time our servant pastor, Bob Clifford, goes by and he picks up the card and he's like, oh man, your husband makes me look so bad. And I said, well then what are you going to do about it, Bob? And he just laughs. So anyway, you just have to be able to make it a priority.
One of the other things that we do is we'll email one another, but when we emails for us are a safe place. If there's something that I need to have a serious discussion about with Teresa, we don't do that in email. Or if she's in trouble for something, I don't do that in email. So email for us is a safe place of communicating back and forth. So if you do something like this, create that environment and use it for that. Don't use it for something else. So that's really important. Or all the work that you thought of to get to that point, you just flushed. So.
Here we're going to talk about choosing to love and remain faithfully committed. That sounds really easy to do, but I think all of us can think of people in our lives who this would probably be a very hard thing to do. And for Les and I, we can tell you that it is hard. There's things you go through in your life when you're married, and sometimes you just go, I don't think I can do this anymore. But for Les and I, because the road I traveled in my first marriage, when we got married, we vowed to each other that divorce would never be an option for us. There would never be a back door. Because if you let there be that option and you have a back door, you will use it. The world is the living statistic of divorce and what it does, because it's an out for us. If you're not meeting my needs, if you're not doing it my way, blah, 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 then I'm out of here. Go find somebody else. And then those statistics keep getting worse the more times that you're married. And we'll be honest with you, we cannot meet each other's needs totally. We have to have God first. If God doesn't meet our needs first, there's no way I can meet every need that he needs. It's humanly impossible. We are sinners, and we will fail. And so we have to be able to make sure that God has that place in our lives where he can help us choose to love and remain faithfully committed. First, let's define what love is. Love, as the world uses it, includes an expectation to get something in return. That's just the world's way of loving. But the Bible reveals another kind of love, which the world does not understand. And it's a kind of love that provides the perfect setting for a one-flesh experience of sex and marriage. And that love is agape love. And agape love in the Bible means unconditional and irrevocable. No matter what happens, no matter how high the tide of calamity rises, and no matter what circumstances or situations hit your marriage, you will choose to persevere through it. Because if you have God, and we can tell you incredible success stories, people. We mentor. That's one of the things that we do, because we have such a passion for marriage. After the road we walked and the things that we've been through and the things that I've been through with divorce, we have watched people be healed from homosexuality, affairs. You name it. We've watched God bring people back together that the world will look at and say, walk away from it, it's not worth it. And we've watched God change their hearts, and they're amazing stories, and it's awesome. We have to choose to turn toward each other when tragedy or trouble strikes our family. Choose to comfort each other and to help each other through a crisis. And if we think, sitting here today, that we're not going to end up with tragedy, trouble, or a crisis, we're telling ourselves a lie. Because we can't walk in this world and not have it. And some of you may have already experienced in many ways, whether it's been death with friends or family, or divorce, or loss of friendships. There's all kinds of things that come into our life. One of the areas I'm going to share here with you that truly shows you the love that Les had for me was God's love came when we have had to struggle and deal with my baggage of depression. It's not fun. It's not something that I would want to have anyone have to walk through. But, and he didn't sign on for it. He had no idea. And I even had no idea how far it would go in my life. But I will tell you that the day that I found myself being driven in an ambulance because I had gone 3 days without food and water and slept. And you have to realize that I had 3 children at this time in my life, full-time job, and I was taken to St. Mary's, and they were sure that I had overdosed, and I had not. When you don't eat and drink for that long, and you sleep for that long, and you've been dealing with depression for a while, and you're not medicated, your body masks a lot of things. So once they made sure that I hadn't overdosed, I then went up to the 3rd floor of St. Mary's for a week. It was the most eye-opening experience in my life. I was the oldest person there. Most of the people there were 16 years of age and younger. But it didn't lessen my depression or what the severity that it caused in my life. But I tell you, I will never forget. And you have to realize that when I left my house that day, I told no one where I was going. I just left in my car. Didn't tell Les. He had no idea where I was, what was going on. Checked myself into a whole hotel room that was eventually opened with force by police. And so here, when he finds out with a phone call, not from me, he then calls our pastor of our church where we were going at the time, and he meets him there with some other friends. And when I finally got to walk down to see him, I'll never forget that hug, because he wouldn't let go of me. Now, it would have been really easy for him to say, "This is crap, people. I don't need this. I have 3 kids I got to go back home and take care of. I have a wife that's on the 3rd floor of St. Mary's, don't know where we're going to go, don't know what we're going to do." The world's way would have told him that would have been the answer to that solution. That wasn't. Instead, he just loved me more.
And Teresa's right. We don't know what all we're going to experience in marriage, and it's going to change as we change. And we've experienced, a broad gamut of things in the last 22 years. And the last 8 years have been fantastic. But there's a lot of things that we went through, to get to that point.
And, at that point in my life, I also could have been really angry at God. And I did wrestle with him. It's not that I wasn't, but it wasn't like I just wanted to give up on him because I knew he'd been there for me. But I tell you what, when we go back and look at our life and the road we walk for a specific reason, even though there are many times I've asked God to take that away from me, he's bigger and he knows more than I know. And evidence of that was the day that I had to sit on my son's bed because he'd been cutting on himself. And he was so far gone and so far down. And he was in college. And if God hadn't let me walk that road, I couldn't have sat there with him and said, "I know just how you feel. You think there's no hope. You think there's no way out. But we're going to get there. We're going to do what we need to do. We're going to believe that God is bigger than all of this." And I can tell you today, our son is fine. He has bipolar disorder, but he's medicated, and we walk that road. And we share something as a mom and a son, because I chose to believe that God knew more than I knew, and I needed to walk that road of depression. So the problem in our society today is that people are not committed to making a marriage work. They do not expect to do what it takes to make a marriage last. They expect instant and automatic gratification without any effort, any patience, and any difficulty. A truly faithful commitment endures all types of trouble, trial, and trauma. Those who are faithfully committed in marriage regard their marriage as the most priceless possession, a genuine treasure. And I can stand here and tell you today that if we hadn't persevered, I couldn't say that. But I can tell you now, it's the most priceless possession I have outside of my relationship with God, is being married to this man.
And the agape love that we talk about there, one of the first times that you're really going to experience it the way that God has probably intended it to, is on your honeymoon. And guys, there's a new book out, and it's not just for guys. This is for girls, for you girls as well. It's called The Honeymoon of Your Dreams: Practical Guide to Planning a Romantic Honeymoon. And I think that the key point that you need to remember, especially for the guys on your honeymoon, it's nothing about conquest. It's not conquest time on that. It's a time when you need to really be tender with your wife. It's a time when you need to look at developing a trust over that time, the kind of trust that gets you through the types of things that Teresa just talked about. So the objective for your first few weeks of sexual encounters should be to develop that intimacy, to create the environment where your wife's going to feel comfortable with you, where she's going to trust you, build a deep trust. And believe me, there are lots of examples where the honeymoon is the worst experience that a married couple has in their marriage. And even such, Michael Smalley, who I know that you've seen some of the Smalley stuff as you've gone through Relationship Builders, they had an awesome honeymoon planned. Everything that could go wrong went wrong, and they were ready for divorce when they got back from their honeymoon. So,
and actually, this book is really good. This book just came out. It's a 2007 book, and of all the books that we've read, we're avid book readers. This is the only book on a honeymoon. And what's really awesome about this book, it's two doctors that have written it, who've had 30 years of practice, a woman and a man. The woman is a gynecologist, an OBGYN, and they can tell you there are more horror stories about honeymoons than there are good stories. And that's why they felt convicted to write this book, to give you the tools to make sure that you have an incredible honeymoon, and that you could experience it the way God wants you to. And so it really is a great read. Both of our kids, our son is getting married June 9th and has been engaged for a year. He was engaged last Easter. And both him and his fiance, we gave them that book, and they've read it, and they both said it's totally changed the way they looked at what they were going to do on their honeymoon.
So, like I said, spend the time to look at something like that, but it really is a time when you really want to be tender with one another, just really building a strong trust in what takes place. And the thing you need to remember is that sexual intimacy is not a formula. It's something that you're going to have to work on, and the honeymoon is a good place to get a good start with that.
I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about genuine sexual intimacy and the power it has to heal, renew, refresh, restore, and sustain your marriage. And I can tell you this because I carried a lot of shame with me. That's one of the baggage items that I carried, was shame from my past, shame from having premarital sex, shame from divorce, all of that stuff. And shame will rob you of genuine sexual intimacy. Your real sexual intimacy links married partners with the strongest of strands that are emotional, mental, and spiritual, and intensely physical. So there's that 4 component of sexual intimacy. Here are some factors that hinder sexual intimacy. The habit of criticism. When we continually criticize the person that we're married to, it does nothing for your sexual intimacy. I had to laugh about a story that was told in one of our books. The story of the young couple who were really worried on their honeymoon. They didn't want each other to see each other naked. So they were trying to plan how that wouldn't happen. Okay? So they thought they'd take a shower in the dark, which is great. That's fine. So they were doing that, and unbeknownst to them, the washcloth fell over the drain. So the next thing they knew, they were cleaning up a flooded bathroom with lights full-blown, naked, and laughing. So, it's like, when we criticize, when you think about that, she could have really been bothered by the fact if he had said something about her body or criticized how she looked or whatever. They could laugh about that situation because criticism hadn't prevailed before. And body image is huge for women. That's one of the things we'll talk about in our breakout. I have a handout. Body image is huge when it comes to sex for women. Another factor that hinders is bottled up anger and resentment. And anger was huge for me. I went through tons of anger. I did things that people couldn't have even imagined that I would do. I put my fist through walls. I threw things at things. There was a side of me that people didn't even know exist. They thought I lied when I told them that. So you have to deal with the things you need to deal with, or you're going to end up with it bottled up. Another hindering factor is the failure to communicate. Lack of trust in one's partner or self. And here again, anxiety about one's physical appearance. And I always laugh about that one because when I was in counseling, when Les and I were when we were first living together, and I finally went back into counseling, and this was kind of my journey back to God, I was really self-conscious. I've always been self-conscious about how I looked. There was a time that people thought I was anorexic. I weighed like 125 pounds, and there was a time I weighed 190 pounds. So I have really wrestled with body image a major portion of my life. But I can remember talking to her and telling her how much I struggled with this. And she looked at me and she goes, "Do you really think Les goes to bed with a tape measure and measures your thigh before you have sex?" And I was like, "Well, no, not really." And she says, "You have to move past this. Somehow I had to deal with that image thing. And it's really hard because of what's painted on the front of magazine covers and all those kind of things and TV. So other things that hinder: spectatoring during lovemaking, de-emphasizing the value of sex, predictable mechanical sex, same thing over and over, lack of sensitivity, absence of non-sexual physical touching, and we've talked on that before. And here's a real good one: too much TV. I'm telling you what, people, TV can rob us of so much of our time together. We have learned over the past few years how easy it is to shut that off button and learn how to once again communicate and talk and go deep and be intimate. And TV will rob you of that. It'll rob you of your family's time. Okay,
so just a few prescriptions for intimacy. The first is establish a mutual trust. And again, we come back to the trust issue. Making sure that your spouse knows that your marriage is a safe place. Second item is to learn to enjoy sensuousness. And when we talk about that, it's just being, learn to enjoy being held or holding hands or being touched. It's not to be confused with sensuality, which is a preoccupation with the physical aspects of sex. And then the third item is relate sexually as lovers. And if you want to build intimacy, you need to really begin to relate to each other, knowing what they like, what they don't like. Don't get into a dull routine. Enjoy just your spouse for who they are, and being able to look forward to what you have in your relationship. It's really key. So in wrapping it up, we just want you to understand that God's got a huge desire for you to enjoy what you have in your marriage or in your future marriage, and to know that He's got an awesome future plan for you guys.
You just have to trust Him, and we're a walking example that when you do, amazing things happen. And we have a great relationship, and that's what we want the world to see. We want them to see that this is how God planned marriage to be. And you can walk through it all, even the yuck.